his answer. Mr. Speaker, it's unacceptable for the Minister of Community Services to ignore these community advocates. They do important work in our community and they deserve to have respect and access to government ministers, including this particular Minister of Community Services. My final supplementary to the Minister. Will the Minister make a concerted effort to respond to letters and make good on her word to meet with Nova Scotians with concerns about community services issues?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to make it very clear. I read every email that I receive. I see every letter. There's a system in place to reply to them, and often I actually reply to them. So I have been probably one of the most accessible ministers that this province has seen in a long time. I have met with an enormous amount of groups, and they've been very happy about that. We have hundreds and hundreds of people that would like to meet with me, and I'm doing everything in my power during the time in order to make that available to those people. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Health Promotion and Protection, and it is about the H1N1 inoculation program that we had in place last fall. In a year-end story in the Chronicle Herald, Mr. Speaker, Dr. Strang indicated that just over 50% of the population of Nova Scotia had been immunized and that immunization would continue in the new year. We know that it's been reported in New Brunswick that 60% of its population have been inoculated, and that has been suggested that it's one of the highest jurisdictions in the world. Given that the dust has now settled on the H1N1 inoculations, I wonder if the minister could indicate what percentage of Nova Scotia's population have been immunized now for H1N1.
The Honourable Minister of Health Promotion and Protection.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the member for the question. Mr. Speaker, we're still getting paperwork in from around the province with respect to the vaccination program. Mr. Speaker, what I can tell the honourable member is that we have distributed enough vaccine to immunize 65% of the population of Nova Scotia.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Clayton Park on your first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the minister is aware, there was some criticism raised at the time of the inoculations and immunization clinics that we weren't immunizing in our schools like our neighbours in New Brunswick were doing. And some districts utilized physicians while others were late in establishing that network. Although many people work very hard and we acknowledge that, I think it's important that we do ask whether or not we could have done better in the wake of this. And another issue which we're interested in exploring today is the cost of those H1N1 mass vaccination clinics. So could the minister please indicate today the total cost to government, and that would be to the Department of Health in particular, excluding the district health authorities, for the mass H1N1 vaccination program?
The Honourable Minister of Health Promotion and Protection.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm probably more aware than many people of the issues that arose around the immunization program, including some of the, I would say, somewhat over-exuberant claims that were made in this House about the weaknesses in a program that actually went very well, Mr. Speaker, given that it was the largest immunization ever undertaken in the history of our province. Mr. Speaker, we don't have a final cost for the program, but our estimate at the moment is that approximately $23 million was spent for all of the vaccines, the ventilators, and the health human resources that were affiliated with H1N1 program.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Clayton Park on your final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And what I was looking for was the cost for the Department of Health, so that we could then look at the cost individually for the district health authorities. So I'm not too sure if the minister's comment means the $23 million is the global cost, as far as you know. And if you could just clarify that, because my question would have been to ask you now, what is it for the district health authorities? And also, could you confirm whether or not the districts have been reimbursed for any of their costs at this time?
The Honourable Minister of Health Promotion and Protection.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, what sometimes is not well understood is that there were two departments involved in H1N1, that the Department of Health managed essentially our health care system, the clinics that were occurring, the assessment clinics to divert people from the emergency rooms, and really the intensive care units and what have you. Public health is where the vaccination program occurred, and public health is not in the Department of Health, but it's in the Department of Health Promotion and Protection. And so it's very complex looking at the finances across the two departments, and we are still sorting through the information with respect to some of the specific costs in the DHAs, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Premier. Premier, you have now been provided with a copy of the email referenced in my earlier question and tabled in this House. You have now had time to read that. My question, and I will repeat to the Premier, how did this individual have access to confidential and embargoed information, and who gave her permission to distribute?
The Honourable the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think it's probably because she read the Canadian Press story that was already online.
The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party on your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, knowing the information was confidential at the time it was distributed, what explanation do you have for a serious breach of protocol?
Hear her.
The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, it was hardly confidential. It had been filed by the Canadian Press. It had been reported on by the CPC. I'm not sure why she thinks it is confidential, Mr. Speaker. It wasn't confidential. It was information that was in the public domain.
Order. Order, please. The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party on your final
Mr.
supplementary.
Speaker, I would ask that the Premier read it himself, because I think there is reference to wanting the party members to have the information prior to. So my question is this: is this another example of this government trying to cover up, do damage control for what they knew would be a very unpopular budget?
The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I don't know if she's read the email she sent over to me. It begins by saying, you may have already heard on the news, Mr. Speaker. I'm not sure how much more clear that could be.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Energy. Mr. Speaker, the Wheeler report was released last winter. Many renewable energy suppliers are waiting to see how the minister will respond to this report. Yet we have heard very little from the minister or his department in terms of an official response and a plan. So my question for the minister: when will you be issuing your recommendations in response to the Wheeler report?
The Honourable Minister of Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member opposite for this question. There is no doubt that Dr. David Wheeler did an absolutely fantastic job, particularly when it comes to collecting information, making sure that his report was thorough and had the detailed sort of advice that as a minister, and I know as a critic for the opposition, the official opposition, it was with some probable delight that we looked at these recommendations, because he very clearly laid out some good alternatives for us to be able to have a very good look at. And that's where we are at this stage. As we review this with the staff, we continue to look at where we're going to go, particularly with some of the more specific recommendations when it comes to such things as Efficiency Nova Scotia and various other recommendations. These are things that will be in the fullness of time, I assure you. There will be a response from the department. Up at this stage, we're still looking at one recommendation after another.
The honourable member for Dartmouth East on your first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm glad to hear there will be a response at some point in the future, but with each passing day, opportunities in the renewable energy sector in Nova Scotia are lost. At a recent Resources Committee meeting, Minus Pulp and Paper said they need feed-in tariffs as recommended by Wheeler and the ability to sell directly to retail as recommended repeatedly by independent studies and the minister's own department. Wheeler's report suggests 15% of renewable energy should come from biomass, yet offers no justification for this number and no analysis on what a sustainable level of biomass harvest would be in Nova Scotia. Yesterday, Nova Scotia Power announced plans that it's going to move ahead with further biomass projects after reaching an agreement with NewPage for a project in Port Hawkesbury. And while the NewPage project may be sustainable by itself, it is unclear how many projects our province can sustain. Mr. Speaker, can the minister tell me why he's allowing Nova Scotia Power to plan additional biomass projects when your government has yet to provide any data or analysis that establishes exactly how much biomass can be sustainably harvested in this province?
The Honourable Minister of Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, the member opposite, of course, has the situation where there's many complex things involved in this particular file. And it's, you know, odd when you sit in opposition, and having been there on occasion, when we sat in opposition, we had all the answers. We had all the answers. But let me tell you, this is a complicated file, whether it's biomass or whether it's feed-in tariffs. Feed-in tariffs alone, if we want to look very clearly at it, and I have a new executive assistant, let me tell you, when it comes to Cheryl Ratchford and the advice that she gives me on feed-in tariffs, we look at communities involved, we look at businesses involved, we look at First Nations involved. Those are some complex issues. They have to be done in a timely fashion and a fashion that's well organized, and the rush of going about with all the answers to all the questions immediately is not part of the responsibility of this particular minister, let me assure you.
Okay. The honourable member for Dartmouth East on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, I would agree with the Minister of Energy that some of these issues are complex, but you look at renewable to retail, which has been recommended by the minister's own department for years, and yet they haven't moved on it. Isn't it interesting how in opposition, the NDP were very concerned about these issues and they needed to be dealt with immediately, yet now they're in government, there's no need for immediate answers to anything. Mr. Speaker, biomass is already part of Nova Scotia's energy future, but it must be done right. Biomass is only a green energy source under the right conditions. It appears, though, that by the time the government makes a decision, industry will have already made the decisions on how much biomass this province will be moving ahead with. So, Mr. Speaker, why are Nova Scotians, and in particular woodland owners, still waiting for this government to determine and announce an annual sustainable biomass harvest?
The Honourable Minister of Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank the member again for the question. You know, I will agree with him on this point, and it's a steep learning curve, and you've done a good job since you've been here. It must be done right. That will not be a point of dispute. But when you do something correctly, you do it in a timely fashion, you do it in a fashion with the proper pace, the proper information, and when the decision is made, it's the correct decision.
Hear, 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 hear.
The Honourable Member for Argyll.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. My question to you today is to the Premier. You indicated, or the Premier indicated during question period last Thursday, that he'll be travelling to Yarmouth to meet with Town Council. The decision to kill the Cat Ferry was made in mid-December. This is the first time that he's gone to Yarmouth to discuss economic development and the ferry situation with the municipalities. My question to the Premier, who proposed the meeting with Mayor Mooney and the Yarmouth councils, and why are you just meeting with municipal governments?
The Honourable Premier.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. We have had ongoing discussions with many different organizations, many different people in Yarmouth. We've been talking to them about the plan forward and the fact that it is now time for the community and for Southwest Nova to invest in a strategy that's going to strengthen the economy there. As to who specifically proposed the meeting, I can't tell the member that. We've had so many discussions and have been in those discussions for so long, it would be difficult to say who proposed it, when, but certainly it was always part of the program. They've been to see me. Many, as the member opposite in fact knows, because he was at one of those meetings, that I've had plenty of correspondence and opportunity to discuss with community leaders in Yarmouth this situation.
The honourable member for Argyle on your first supplementary.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The communities affected have presented solutions to remedy this problem, but all the officers have been shot down by this NDP government. I'm glad to see that your Economic and Development Minister has finally woken up long enough that he should support MP Greg Kerr's initiative on Team Southwest. As a matter of fact, he keeps getting that wrong. He keeps calling it Team West. It's actually Team Southwest. Mr. Speaker, to the Premier, what are you as Premier planning to offer the communities of Southwest Nova that have been severely impacted by the disastrous decision of you and your NDP government?
The Honourable the Premier.
Now, Mr. Speaker, the member actually refers to a different group, which is Team Southwest. Team West, Mr. Speaker, is actually an initiative of this government, Mr. Speaker, and I guess he obviously didn't know that. Mr. Speaker, the reality is we are dedicated. We are dedicated to the proposition that you need to strengthen the economy of Southwest Nova Scotia, the initiatives that we will undertake, and I've certainly made it clear to Minister Ashfield and to others that we're certainly prepared to work with them, but, Mr. Speaker, we are going to move forward on initiatives that will actually strengthen Southwest Nova Scotia, not ones that will simply put money into unsustainable operations.
The honourable member for Argyle on your final supplementary.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It also underlines a problem here is that we've got two initiatives going on now, and we should have one concerted effort towards helping Southwest Nova Scotia. The ACOA, the federal government, set up Team Southwest, one that should have the full concentration by this government as well as the federal government to help the people of Southwest Nova Scotia, to help the people of Yarmouth. Mr. Speaker, my question to the Premier, since you said no to every initiative that has come forward from the community, what commitments are you prepared to make to the communities of Southwest Nova?
The Honourable the Premier.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Obviously, what we're prepared to do is to be committed to working with those communities, to working with that region, to strengthen the economy, Mr. Speaker. But the only suggestion that comes from the member forward is that we keep putting money into a service which was declining, which had little or no benefit to the people of Southwest Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker, and which was essentially a waste of our money at a rate of something more than $400 for every person who got off the ferry in Yarmouth, Mr. Speaker. We don't intend to continue to do that.
The honourable member for Richmond.
Mr. Speaker, there appears to be some level of confusion as to the site selection process that is being used by this government to build a new correctional facility somewhere in eastern Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, late last month, the Minister of Justice indicated that a site selection decision for the new correctional facility would be made in April. In fact, I believe he also confirmed that they are now down to 2 sites in determining where the new facility will be built. Mr. Speaker, interestingly today, in the Truro Daily News, the member for Truro Bible Hill states that a site selection decision for the new correctional facility will actually be made in June. And on top of that, she has indicated that they have now added a new site in Truro to the list of the site selection process for this new correctional facility. So my question to the Minister of Justice, would he please indicate to us whether he has actually changed the date for a decision on the new site for the new correctional facility, and whether in fact the member for Truro Bible Hill is correct in stating that a new site in Truro has been added to that list?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the member for the question. I wish to make some clarity to the issue before this House. There were 7 sites, and there's still 7 sites on the list. They've narrowed it down to 3 where they're focusing on doing some testing. Due to the climatic conditions of our province, there were some delays in the process earlier. I mean, if we had had this weather that we've had in the last week or so, we'd have probably had it done. But unfortunately, January, February, and a good part of March did not allow those that need to do the work to get the work done. And I did state, if you check the record, that it may get delayed, and I had stated in this House on several occasions that the weather conditions and other types of barriers may delay the process, and that's where we're at right now.
The honourable member for Richmond on your first supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it's one thing for the minister to say it'll be made in April, but it may be delayed, and then to have his colleague from Truro Bible Hill say it will be made in June. It would appear that the member for Truro Bible Hill certainly has much more certainty as to when the decision will be made than the actual minister. Mr. Speaker, one of the issues here as well has been the silence of the member for Antigonish, because Antigonish is one of the communities that stands to lose their existing correctional facility. And I have a letter that was sent to the member from Antigonish from Warden Herb Delory of the County of Antigonish, calling on him to show leadership and to speak up for those people because of the lost tax revenue and tax base that would be available to them if the new facility were to be built in Antigonish. But as far as I can see, I've yet to hear the member from Antigonish raise that issue here in this House. So allow me, on behalf of the members of Antigonish and on behalf of the residents of the Strait area, will the minister confirm or deny whether Antigonish is one of the 3 sites still under consideration for the new correctional facility?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
It is my understanding that the 7, that Antigonish was included in one of the 7. I have not sat down with the group that's doing the analysis to ask them which of the 3 sites. I will wait in anticipation for them to put the names forward for me to have further discussion and clarity on that issue. But I understand Antigonish was on it before. It's still there.
The honourable member for Richmond on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, there certainly seems to be much more confusion that exists in the cabinet than there is in the backbench. We had the Premier earlier today telling us he had no idea of an email sent yesterday from the President of the NDP party, and you would have us believe that. We have the Minister of Justice telling us, I don't know which 3 sites have been finalized, but the member for Truro Bible Hill says Truro is one of them. He doesn't know when a decision will be made on the site. The member for Truro Bible Hill tells us it'll be made in June. So my question again, who is going to make the decision on where the site for the new correctional facility will be made? The Minister of Justice or the minister or the member for Truro Bible Hill?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
To put clarity on that, there's a process in place, and I'm allowing the process to work through, and I'm not interfering in the process. And when the sites are narrowed down and all the detailed analysis has been completed, at that time recommendations will be moved forward and a decision will be made.
The honourable member for Cumberland South.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, through you, my question would be for the Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal. Yesterday on the Cobblepot Pass, there was a motor vehicle accident which required the westbound lane to be shut down. Traffic, Mr. Speaker, was rerouted at exit 8 after the toll. So traffic would have traveled the highway, paid their toll, then they were rerouted at exit 8 through the Wentworth-Collingwood Road, which is a road that's closed for spring restrictions, weight restrictions, and then on through to Wentworth. Can the Minister explain why this road was used yesterday?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member from Cumberland South for the question. I know it's an issue of concern to him when it comes to the Cobblepot Pass. I've been made aware of the response and the quick response by the police and the various other medical authorities that were there, and particularly I draw attention to light flight and how quickly it worked. That decision was made by the RCMP on site. That decision was a decision, of course, that has resulted in, from I've been made aware of this, and I know the member from Cumberland South probably is aware of it too, that there has been some concerns about the selection because of the damage to that particular route. And let me assure the member opposite that because of the decision that's been made, because of that decision on how it was made, that will be reviewed as one decision. But they are the experts on the scene. They are the experts there at the accident. And any particular damage that is caused to that road will be looked at by the department.
The honourable member for Cumberland South, and your first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And actually, the minister did answer my last question. I was going to ask if they would take a look at that damage and have a review done. The residents would like to see the damage repaired. My question would be: is it going to be the taxpayers that pay that, or will it be the bondholders of the Cobequid Pass that would actually pay for that damage that was caused by that unusual traffic through the area?
Order. The time for oral question period has expired. The honourable government House Leader.
Okay, Mr. Speaker, would you please call address and reply to the speech from the throne, Mr. Speaker?
Address and reply to the speech from the throne. I'll recognize the honourable member for Cumberland South first. The honourable member for Cumberland South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, on rising the point of order that was raised last week by the Minister of Finance on Thursday. The Minister of Finance, you recall, rose and said that I had made some very disparaging remarks, unparliamentary remarks directed personally towards him, he felt. And Mr. Speaker, although you haven't ruled on that yet, and I understand you were not prepared to today, I did want to rise my place and say, first of all, that the honourable member was right in one regard, that I did make some unparliamentary remarks in this House that I apologize to the House for, Mr. Speaker. But I want to say that they were not directed personally towards the Minister of Finance. I directed those comments, Mr. Speaker, to the government. And Mr. Speaker, what I do not apologize for is the decision of this government and the impact it's having on Cumberland County and the people of this province, raising taxes, broken promises. Mr. Speaker, goes on and on and on. Okay. For that, Mr. Speaker, I do not apologize, and I will never apologize for those things, Mr. Speaker.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, honourable member. You're right. I've not made a ruling yet on the points of order that were raised last Thursday. I will on a future day, but I will take into consideration your remarks here this afternoon. I was just going to recognize the honourable Minister of Health.
On supply. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to have an opportunity to rise in my place for a few moments in reply to the speech from the throne, Mr. Speaker. And first of all, I would like to congratulate and thank Her Honour for the dignified manner in which she carries out the considerable demands on her office. I, like many other people, often watch the small account in the Chronicle Herald of how she travels around the province and meets with many groups, Mr. Speaker, and I'm sure brings them a great deal of dignity and decorum to many of the events that she attends on behalf of her office. Mr. Speaker, I also want to take an opportunity before I speak to some of the issues that are important to me as a member representing Halifax Needham to thank members of my constituency association executive for their support over the years, Mr. Speaker. There are a number of us here in this legislature who first arrived in this place in 1998 and on the 24th of March, Mr. Speaker. So it's been 12 years that I've had the privilege of being in this legislature along with a number of other members, and when I reflect on that time, Mr. Speaker, I'm always very mindful that I did not get here on my own. I got here with the support of a small group of committed people, very dedicated to seeing that the north end of Halifax would be represented here on the floor of this Assembly with a member from the New Democratic Party, Mr. Speaker. And I want to acknowledge their hard work, their dedication, their support, their friendship throughout a considerable period of time, Mr. Speaker. And I remind you, although I'm sure, Mr. Speaker, you need no reminding, that during that period of time, I think we've experienced probably 5 elections: the 98 election, the 99 election, 2003, 2006, and then 2009. So really quite a few general elections in a very short period of time. And these folks are the people who make it possible for us to come to this Assembly and do our work on behalf of our constituents and our community. So additionally, Mr. Speaker, I do want to take an opportunity to thank the constituents of Halifax-Needham. As most members of this chamber will know, Halifax-Needham is it covers the geographic area of the north end of Halifax and a certain portion of central Halifax. And I've always taken some delight in being able to stand in this chamber and say that we make ships and beer in my constituency because we have that kind of mixed residential, industrial, commercial, manufacturing. So one of the few places where we still see manufacturing in the province and in Halifax. In fact, right in the heart of North End Halifax. So I like to say that you know, we also have the Navy, so that makes us a formidable force in this Assembly. And the constituency of Halifax-Needham additionally has an amazing history. It's the part of Halifax that was devastated, for example, with the explosion in the Narrows, now commonly known as the Halifax explosion. And it is a situation, a tragedy that is remembered every December 6th in my community. And it very much, I think, the resilience of people in the north end of Halifax following the explosion is very much a tradition that people who are descendants from families who lived in the north end of Halifax and who saw the reconstruction of the north end of Halifax are very mindful of. A very resilient community, a very hard-working community, a very caring community, and very much a community of communities. Mr. Speaker, during the African Heritage Month, I had the privilege of being at the Community Y in my constituency the day that Mayor Peter Kelly assembled with the descendants of Africville and members of the Africville Genealogy Society, along with my colleague, the minister responsible for African Nova Scotian Affairs and the Premier and many other officials, to hear the official apology which was given to the former residents and descendants of Africville, along with the announcement to reconstruct a replica of Seaview United Baptist Church. And Mr. Speaker, this, to be the member of the legislature for that area on that particular date was truly a moving experience for me. Something that I know people have worked very hard to to see a resolution to the kind of hurt and the kind of unresolved feelings and circumstances that people have felt with respect to the loss of their community. And when I reflect back over the 12 years that I have had the privilege of representing Halifax Needham, I think about all of the incredible people I've met, the things I've learned about my community, and the opportunities and the occasions I've had to participate in those very kinds of seminal moments, really, Mr. Speaker, when you just feel so privileged to even be in the room with people who have such good motivation and who have worked so hard to realize their aspirations, whatever they may be. I think, Mr. Speaker, that's what makes the work that we do so wonderful, really, in many respects, Mr. Speaker. And so we get into this place, and sometimes the cut and thrust of question period and various debates where things maybe don't go so well, and people leave feeling a little bruised, Mr. Speaker. It's back in our constituencies where we really do the work and really get to experience the very profoundly positive side of being a local elected representative and making a contribution toward the work of people in our constituency. So, Mr. Speaker, that brings me to the speech from the throne and some of the initiatives that are contained in the speech from the throne, which I think will make a significant difference in the quality of life for many of the people in my constituency. I'm very privileged to have in my constituency a large number of seniors, Mr. Speaker. And, when the Honourable Finance Minister was speaking early, he talked about how seniors, the impact seniors in his riding have had on him, and seniors in my constituency have had a considerable impact on me. And I know that the concerns that seniors have are the cost of living, the cost of electricity, for example. I know that they have benefited greatly from the removal of the provincial portion of the HST on their electricity. And I know, Mr. Speaker, that health care is probably one of their greatest concerns. And many people are profoundly grateful that a lot of work had been done to make it possible for seniors to go into a long-term care facility and no longer have to pay the health care portion of their costs. But there are still many, many issues that seniors confront with respect to the healthcare system, including being able to have quick access to medical care. They're confronted sometimes by very long wait times and wait lists for procedures such as orthopedic surgeries. I certainly hear this a lot, Mr. Speaker, and I'm very pleased that I'm in a position now where I can actually work on these problems with the district health authorities to improve wait times. And Mr. Speaker, this is certainly a commitment that our government made in the 2009 election, and it is something that we are working very, very hard on. And we believe that it's not a problem that will be transformed overnight, but Mr. Speaker, through good management and good practices and good planning, we will see some significant changes in this area. Mr. Speaker, as Minister of Health, I meet with a lot of different groups and organizations, and I have a chance to talk to them about what my priorities are. And I tell them that I essentially have 5 priorities, 5 things I would like to do. One of the things that certainly has to be done is we have to get our financial house in order in the Department of Health. And when I say that, I'm not talking about cutting programs and just ravishing the healthcare system with kind of a slash and burn approach. That is not acceptable to me or to members of this government. However, we think that there are many sensible things that can be done to improve the financial planning and management of our healthcare system. And we are and I, as Minister of Health, am not very satisfied with some of the things that I have found in the Department of Health. The overrun of the Colchester Hospital is, I think, one of the perhaps most serious examples, but nevertheless, it is a significant example of something that, financial planning or a lack of management, something that has gone dreadfully wrong when a hospital is essentially doubled in cost from what it was originally planned for. So we have been spending far beyond our means, and we can't sustain that kind of spending. And the needs of people in our province are too great, particularly with respect to our healthcare system, to continue on like this. It's awfully tough, Mr. Speaker, to have to say no to very legitimate requests for support when you know that money has not been properly managed or planned in the past. And it would be wonderful to have had that those resources to put into areas where there are very legitimate concerns. But the reality is that some bad decisions were made, and now there is a lack of finances to deal with that. So getting our own financial house in order in the Department of Health is a very important element of being able to provide good health care. And we are working on this diligently. The second thing I tell people is a priority for me, Mr. Speaker, is keeping the campaign promises we made to the people of Nova Scotia in the 2009 election. And Mr. Speaker, I'm very pleased to say that in the first year, we had made 4 commitments to hire an emergency room advisor, which we did, Mr. Speaker. We hired Dr. John Ross, and he will be reporting shortly with an interim report with respect to emergency room care around the province. We also made a commitment that we would eliminate security deposits in long-term care, and Mr. Speaker, this was done a number of months ago. We announced that we were eliminating security deposits, and this was very favorably received, particularly by the public, Mr. Speaker. And I had calls from individuals all around the province who had family members in long-term care facilities who had paid a significant amount of money in order to get a family member into a long-term care facility. And Mr. Speaker, not having money to put a security deposit down to get access to health care should never have been a barrier, Mr. Speaker. And why any government would ever have allowed that practice is beyond me, Mr. Speaker, but it was allowed, and it is no longer allowed. We have eliminated that, as we promised to do. We also introduced a Ministerial Accountability Act with respect to emergency room care, Mr. Speaker, and that legislation was tabled here in the fall. And as a result of that legislation, there have been some public meetings around the province with DHAs and communities looking at how better primary health care as well as emergency health care may be provided to people. And I will be tabling a report coming out of some of those community meetings, Mr. Speaker, before this session ends. The last commitment that we made for last year, Mr. Speaker, with respect to the healthcare system was to introduce a travel and accommodation allowance for people who can't get, who require health care. It's not available in Nova Scotia. They have to leave the province. And I'm pleased to say that that commitment has been kept as well, Mr. Speaker. So in this throne speech, we made a number of new commitments that will see an improvement in the healthcare system. A rapid response unit will be set up to assist in the flow of people moving through the emergency room here in the Capital District Health Authority. They're already using such a model in Cape Breton. I had the opportunity with the Deputy Premier to tour the Cape Breton District Regional Hospital. And we met with physicians and head nurse and other personnel in the emergency room there. And they've been using this system for a while and it works very well. And the problems that they had had with people backing up in the emergency department has significantly improved to the point where they really have no longer have a problem. And so this rapid assessment unit will be established here in the capital region to reduce wait times. Another thing, Mr. Speaker, that was in the speech from the throne and will make a great difference, Mr. Speaker, is an emergency protection fund. And this was something that we made a commitment to during the provincial election. And this will allow some short-term and particular initiatives to occur in various places around the province where they need not a system response, but something that's more tailored to the situation that a local community might find with respect to their emergency room. And Mr. Speaker, we think this will make a significant difference. We also have made a commitment to have more nurse practitioners in the long-term care sector. Northwood Incorporated, which is a very large nonprofit long-term care, continuing care organization, which is located in my constituency, although they're going to be opening a new facility fairly soon in Hammonds Plains. They have piloted a nurse practitioner at Northwood. It's been a very successful pilot. And this is a model that needs to be expanded and used throughout the province. And we made a commitment to this, and we will be moving forward with that, Mr. Speaker. I also tell people that mental health is on my priority list, and it's on my priority list and this government's priority list. It's been a personal interest of mine for many years. and largely because I worked in the mental health field for a time, Mr. Speaker, when I first, after I first graduated from social work, and I tell people I was the adolescent social worker at the Nova Scotia Hospital, and I almost was, I wasn't that old at the time, but I worked with adolescents and their families, and I know how difficult it is for families if they have children, if they have adolescents, for that matter, if they have a family member who's an adult, who is experiencing a mental illness, who needs treatment, who's having difficulty getting access to the mental health system, and people fall through the cracks very often in mental health. Mental health has been an area of marginalization within our healthcare system. There's a very interesting history that's been written fairly recently of the Canadian Mental Health Association and the mental health movement in Nova Scotia by Dr. Judith Fingard, she has a co-author. Anyway, it's a very interesting account of the mental health movement here in Nova Scotia, and I've just been reading this, and I'm struck as I read this account at a number of things. I mean, we've made great progress, I believe. We've come a long way from segregating and isolating people with mental illnesses in one facility away from other people with other illnesses. So all across the province now, in all of our district health authorities, we have mental health units, we have mental health beds, with one exception, essentially, Cumberland County. We have no acute care beds in Cumberland County, but all across the province we have specialized services both in hospital and on an outpatient basis to treat people with mental health disorders. But yet, Mr. Speaker, the wait lists are very long, and there are unmet services and for very specialized needs. And I think, for example, Mr. Speaker, of people with eating disorders. It's a very specialized area of mental health. It really needs to have some focus and some attention. We know that we know how difficult it is for young people who have eating disorders, and we've seen situations where people have had to look to go out of province to get treatment. And Mr. Speaker, I'm hoping that in the time that I have available as Minister of Health, however long that will be, the longevity of health ministers, Mr. Speaker, not only in this province but everywhere, doesn't always turn out to be that long. But I'm hoping that that this is an issue that we'll be able to make some progress on, for example, Mr. Speaker. But there are many things that we can do in the field of mental health, and I look forward to an opportunity, certainly when we get into estimates, to talk about some of the things that I'm hoping we'll be able to do in the department. So I put that on the list of one of the priorities that I have. So it's getting our financial house in order, it's keeping our campaign commitments, it's mental health, but it's also, Mr. Speaker, I'm also very interested in seeing an expanded role for primary health care in our province, building teams of healthcare providers, making better use of the scope of practice, the training, the knowledge, the expertise of all members of the healthcare team. Our acute care model is so focused on nurses and doctors, and they are without a doubt very valuable members of providing health care, but there are so many other professional groups that have so much to offer, and particularly in terms of prevention and rehabilitation. Occupational therapists, physiotherapists, social workers, nurse practitioners, pharmacists, and it's been my pleasure to be Minister of Health at a time when we are working with the Pharmacy Association and pharmacy groups really to look at expanding their role in the healthcare system, particularly at a time when drug therapy is a growing part of our healthcare system. So many chronic illnesses are controlled and treated with drugs. The pharmacist is and should be an integral part of the healthcare team. So I think in the not too distant future, we're going to see some significant change in the delivery of healthcare, a move toward more primary care, more community-based team provision of healthcare, and away from people going to acute care facilities for those kinds of services, where acute care will become what it's truly meant to be, a place where people with serious illnesses and in need of highly specialized services will go, where the more community-based primary care will be provided in clinic-like settings. And I would be remiss if I didn't make mention of the North End Community Health Centre in my constituency. It's the oldest community health clinic in the province. It's the first community health clinic where doctors, nurses, social worker, and today many other healthcare providers, nutritionists, and many psychiatric nursing staff and personnel, addictions counselors, for example, all provide services at the North End Clinic, and it's a truly not only a pioneer but quite a significant model for how services can be provided. And because of the services they provide, many people in that community are able to stay out of the emergency departments and not have to show up in the emergency room for their health care, Mr. Speaker. The last thing that was mentioned in the speech from the throne with respect to health and the healthcare system that I'd like to make note of is the whole question of quality, Mr. Speaker. We need to be very mindful of the measures that we need to take to ensure quality in our healthcare system and high standards for patient safety. It's a very fast-paced world now in our acute care facilities, and it's a world that is very much dominated and shaped by technology, diagnostic technology. The need to ensure that we have the controls in place to have diagnostic services and other services of the highest standard so that nothing gets missed. I, as Minister of Health, watch other provinces that have had the problems around diagnostic outcomes and communication of test results to patients, for example. It's a health minister's worst nightmare. And so certainly we are embarking on an initiative in the Department of Health to ensure that we have in place the controls to be able to provide high-quality services and at very high standards for patient safety, so we can prevent the kinds of situations that we have seen elsewhere around test results and the kind of strife that people feel when they find out maybe months later that they were given an improper diagnosis and the controls weren't in place to ensure that these things didn't occur. I mean, it's just a devastating, it's bad enough to not be well and to be seeking treatment and an accurate diagnosis. But to learn, I think, that the system failed. This is when people really feel a system failure. So we're very committed to ensuring that we provide good quality health care, and patient safety is at the top of our list. We sometimes focus a lot on the problems that need to be addressed in the healthcare system. I would be remiss if I didn't take a moment to talk about how fortunate we are in this country to have the remarkable healthcare system we have. With all of its warts and the difficulties, it is an amazing healthcare system. And Mr. Speaker, I was really reminded of that a couple of weeks ago when a working group with of African Nova Scotian healthcare providers brought in two gentlemen from the south side of Chicago who work in a health clinic that is attempting to get Black men in that city to take greater care of themselves in terms of, you know, many of the illnesses and the diseases that men in that particular community suffer from: HIV, AIDS, prostate cancer, hypertension, heart disease, and what have you. And of course, in this part of the United States, there isn't the kind of universal access to health care that we have here in this country. And so the challenges that these healthcare workers face are even greater challenges than we have here in getting men to take better care of themselves. And there's a lot of research that shows that men do not take as good a care of their health. They you know, if it's the machismo or whatever it is about men, they just don't do the annual checkups and all of those things that have to happen. But imagine if you combine that with a system where you have to have health insurance in order to get access to medical care. And most of that health insurance is work-based. If you're in a segment of the population where there's high rates of unemployment, you can pretty well kiss your access to health care goodbye. And it's unbelievable in the unbelievable in the U.S., in this part of Chicago. You know, they told these two gentlemen, they were just fabulous. They told us that in the first nice day this spring, when the weather got good, there were 16 murders in their part of the city that first day. Last year, there were 120-some children with gunshot wounds in the school system. And the whole time they were talking, I was thinking, what must it be like if you're living here and you have no health care, no hospital insurance, no access to a doctor? It's really, truly pretty bad. And this particular clinic that they've set up is very, very interesting. And they also had gone to barber shops. They said, well, where do men go? And men go to barber shops, and they trained the barbers. They trained a number of barbers to talk to men as they were doing their hair, talk to them about the need to do prostate cancer, and they would have the doctors come to the barber shops and do clinics. And so it's a good example, I think, of American innovation. The Americans are a very innovative people when they're in circumstances where they have to problem solve and figure out. And the problem that they're trying to solve is a lack of access to universal health care. And but I sat through this presentation very inspired by their resolve and their resilience, but at the same time thinking how fortunate we are here in this country that we don't have those same barriers. We may have barriers, and we have far from a perfect system, and we do have barriers. And we need to do more around men's health, and we need to do more around the health of men in diverse communities without any question. But at least access in terms of coverage isn't an issue. And for that, I think we need to be both grateful but very vigilant, because we can't take this wonderful healthcare system we have for granted. It's a system that's very expensive. We need to use our resources in a very thoughtful way, a well-planned way, a well-managed way, and I think that we have to be mindful of that at all times. So there are many excellent initiatives going on. Many of them were outlined in the speech from the throne. I will be delighted to see these initiatives come to fruition over the next year or so, Mr. Speaker. And I also want to take an opportunity to thank the staff that I work with in the Department of Health, who essentially take the ideas that have been presented to them by this government and do the detailed planning for how they'll be implemented. They're a very capable, talented, dedicated group of individuals, and they don't get nearly enough recognition for how difficult it is to take an idea and make it a reality. And they do a fine job, Mr. Speaker, and it's been a pleasure working with them thus far. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I'll take my place.
The Honourable the Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, I request that we adjourn debate.
Thank you. So the motion before the House is for to adjourn debate on the speech from the throne. Is the House ready for the question? The question has been called. All those in favour of the motion, please say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion carried. The Honourable, the Deputy Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That adjourns government business for today. Tomorrow being Opposition Day, I wish you recognize the House Leader for the Conservative Party to update us on the hours in the business.
Thank you. The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Of course, the hours for tomorrow will be 2 to 6, and the order of business, opposition members' business will be Bill number 14 and Resolution 100 for debate. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I move the House adjourn for this evening.
Just for clarification, I heard Bill 14, but resolution? Thank you. The motion before the House is for the House to rise and meet again tomorrow at 2 p.m. Is the House ready for the question? The question has been called. All those in favour of the motion, please say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion carried. The House stands adjourned until 2 p.m. tomorrow. We have arrived at the moment of interruption. Tonight's late debate has been moved by the honourable member from Cumberland South. Therefore, be resolved that the taxes of Nova Scotians should not be raised to pay for the deficit the NDP created in their first year in government. The chair recognizes the honourable member for Inverness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I am here standing before you today based on this resolution that the taxes of Nova Scotians should not be raised to pay for the deficit the NDP created in their first year of government. Raising taxes will not help our economy. How can we improve our economy? By focusing things on that we can control. A progressive Conservative government would first look to balance the budget. Why is a balanced budget so important? Well, the 2009-10 budget that the NDP had brought into this House resulted in a debt we know now of about $490 million. Now this deficit not only hurts us today, it does something else. It cripples our future potential. This decision means that you and I will pay somewhere in the vicinity of $20 million each year, every year, until this deficit is retired. Now, in December, I listened to Premier Dexter speak at the Halifax Chamber of Commerce luncheon. And he praised Nova Scotia for having a strong economy relative to other provinces in this country throughout the economic downturn. While we should be proud of the stability of our economy, we must be careful to remember that our economy is defensive by nature in Nova Scotia. We have not faced the cyclical challenges that Ontario has faced with its auto sector industry, or that Alberta has faced with its oil and gas industry, or that Saskatchewan has faced with its potash industry. Many would say that here in Nova Scotia, there are communities that are in recession at all times. I believe government can best help these communities by providing a healthy and competitive economic environment. And in my mind, that does not include higher taxes. For we pay some of the highest taxes in the country here in Nova Scotia. It is more important than ever to balance our budget, because today we have somewhere in the vicinity of $12.5 billion in debt. And looking at the figures presented today in the budget, those figures are going to grow a lot more significantly than they were going to grow when the Conservatives had tabled a budget in the spring of 2009, Mr. Speaker.
That was a balanced budget, too.
And that was a balanced budget. So what should government be focused on? Government should be focused on the things that we can control. We can't control interest rates. Right now, about 1 out of every $11 Nova Scotians pay in taxes is thrown away in interest payments. In fact, I think that's close to 1 in every $8.50. We are fortunate that interest rates are at historic lows. But what happens when interest rates rise? When deficits are run, like are being run this year and the coming 4 years, if interest rates rise, that means that any new debts that are financed by Nova Scotians are going to be financed at a higher rate of interest. Some of the members of this House may remember back to the early 1980s when a mortgage was 18% rate of interest. Now, we don't want to see those days return, but it is a possibility. And one thing we can control is how much debt we have. We cannot control the strength of our Canadian dollar. Our dollar depends largely upon commodity prices. And the first indicator I would look at is the price of oil. And as the price of oil reaches $100 a barrel, we're looking at our currency to reach par value with the US dollar. So we can't control that. In some cases, it's a good thing. As oil royalties rise, it drives up tax base for the federal government, and it's good for our transfers from the federal government. We can control how much government spends, and this is where we should be focused. I believe that the people in Nova Scotia are taxed enough. The average Nova Scotian family works from January right through to June 11th every year, till June 11th, to pay the taxes to keep this province running. That's over half the year, Mr. Speaker. While the federal government is lowering taxes for Nova Scotians, the provincial government is looking at raising taxes. So while the rest of Canada becomes more competitive, Nova Scotia, under the decisions of this NDP government, will become less competitive. What am I doing for time? If we agree that we pay enough taxes, the area the government should be focusing on is expenditure constraint. And as I mentioned earlier, Mr. Speaker, this progressive Conservative Party, if in government, would balance the budget. So, Mr. Speaker, I do want to share some of my remarks today with the member from Cumberland. And we're from Cumberland South. And I just want to mention a couple of other things that I see for the future of this province. I don't see taxes being increased as a good thing for our future. I do see the value of having government services stabilized through good fiscal management by government. I see a smaller government. A smaller government means less pressure on the taxpayer. It gives us power to decrease our debt, and it gives us the ability to create a more competitive business environment, because it is the small business owners of this province that will bring this province to a better, more profitable future. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I would like to conclude my remarks. Thank you.
Thank you. Chair will now recognize the honourable member for Cumberland South. You have approximately 4 minutes left.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank my colleague, the honourable member for Inverness, for again taking great part in this debate, and I'm sure we're going to hear lots more from this young man in the coming years. Mr. Speaker, I just want to, I know I only have a few moments, so I do want to say that this budget we have heard here today is a bad news budget for Cumberland County. Terrible. And Mr. Speaker, I'm looking forward to other members of this House stand up on behalf of the residents of Cumberland County and tell the government that when we've had people over the last while continue to tell us, business people, for example, convenience store owners who have told us this is they're going to be put out of business as a result of increased taxes. Gas retailers who have told us the same thing. Mr. Speaker, there was a story in the local paper over the last week. One guy basically has said, I'm giving up. I can't stand this anymore. This is the straw that will break the camel's back. Cannot continue to fight with New Brunswick companies on an even competitive basis. Mr. Speaker, cross-border shopping is the issue for Cumberland County right now. It is the issue. And how does this government respond to the issue for Cumberland County? By breaking promises. Just 10 months ago, Mr. Speaker, what did they promise during the election? No taxes. No taxes. No tax increases in this province. We become government. What's the first thing they do? Increase taxes. What's the other thing to do, Mr. Speaker? They promised now, balanced budget. Gone. They promised, Mr. Speaker, and I'm going to table this, maybe no one has seen this anymore. This headline in a local paper says, Dexter says he keep Tory promises. You ever heard tell that before? Mr. Speaker, we've heard it every day. And every day they continue to break the promises, Mr. Speaker, that they made 10 months ago. But I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, people in Cumberland County aren't forgetting. And I know the honourable member for Cumberland North, the honourable member there has travelled a lot throughout the constituency, and I know he's got to be hearing on a regular basis from business people and from residents that they cannot stand this any longer. Mr. Speaker, what I was really disappointed, last Wednesday in this House, the Premier said, in response to a question I asked, the Premier, and to his credit, said to me, why don't you work with us? Why don't you work with us and try to find some answers? We know, Mr. Speaker, that's a good suggestion, and I appreciate that from the Premier. So today, Mr. Speaker, in response to that, I introduced a resolution in the House that basically called upon the Premier, Mr. Speaker, hear this, to convene a committee of chambers of commerce, business people, citizens of Cumberland County. The Premier would convene a committee to meet with them and work with them to use that information that he could gather in regards to the loss of taxes for the province, the loss of business revenue for Cumberland County. He could use that to help business in Cumberland County and help the government maybe decide a path to follow to help those businesses in Cumberland County. And he could use it with his Atlantic colleagues, the Atlantic premiers, to find a way to address some of these issues that, Mr. Speaker, are affecting Cumberland County in particular in this part of the province. Mr. Speaker, what did the government do? The government denied that resolution. So, Mr. Speaker, that really speaks to the seriousness of this issue that they see. That speaks, Mr. Speaker, to the seriousness of and sincerity of them to work with our people in Cumberland County to find a resolve to this very, very serious negative impact on Cumberland County of cross-border shopping. Mr. Speaker, the answer to the issue is not to increase taxes. The issue is the issue of higher taxes and cross-border shopping, Mr. Speaker, is for government to work with local business communities, work with citizens, work with the elected officials, work with the municipalities, work with the towns to find a resolve. And Mr. Speaker, I'm calling upon the government of the province and the Premier to please help us in Cumberland County, not with increasing taxes, not by taking away commitments that were made by the previous government, but to truly come together, Mr. Speaker, in the spirit of fairness and help Cumberland County on this very serious issue. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. The honourable member from Hammonds Plains, Upper Sackville.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I'm pleased to rise today to speak to the House on this resolution. As I believe all members of the House, we take our jobs very serious, and you know, constituents are calling us on a regular basis, asking us and telling us their concerns. But the other thing that I always tell the people of Hammonds Plains, Upper Sackville is that, as their MLA, I do take my job serious, and so does this government. I want to begin by clarifying one thing, and that the current fiscal situation faced by all Nova Scotians today is one that this government inherited, not one that we created. This was created by a legacy of unsustainable spending, a legacy that is up to this government to change. Now, Mr. Speaker, over the past 2 months, this side of the House, this government, engaged in the most extensive financial consultations in the province's memory. About 1,500 Nova Scotians, Mr. Speaker, 1,500 Nova Scotians participated in this historical process and shared their values and priorities through a combination of attending back-to-balance sessions that were held from one end of this province to the other. There were also written submissions, and Mr. Speaker, I was proud to be able to attend 2 of them. The one in Sackville and the one in St. Margaret's Bay. And I was surprised, Mr. Speaker, of all of the people that were there. And Mr. Speaker, while there wasn't always a consensus, there was one common thread that ran from one end of this province to the other, right from Cape Breton to Yarmouth. The Nova Scotians, they care deeply about their province and about its future. A future that this government is making, and we are making the right decisions to protect. In the back-to-balance sessions that the Minister of Finance held right across Nova Scotia, we were told very plainly and consistently that we cannot turn to Nova Scotians for more revenue unless we are committed to use every single existing revenue dollar as wisely and efficiently as possible. We listened and we agreed. The experts, now Mr. Speaker, the experts on the Economic Advisory Panel made it clear that if nothing is done to address the structural deficit we inherited from the previous government, our province will be facing a deficit of $1.4 billion within 3 years. Now, Mr. Speaker, that's unacceptable. This is essentially because the gap between how much we spend and how much we take in has been growing bigger and bigger, and would have continued to grow even when the recession ends. Additionally, the structural deficit led by the previous government means that our debt servicing costs just keep rising. Now, Mr. Speaker, our indebted government cannot deliver critical programs and services in healthcare and education. High-quality services that Nova Scotians both expect and deserve, and that's what I heard at the back-to-balance sessions held in the 2 that I attended. As the expert panel pointed out, in order to address the province's financial challenges, government has 3 strategies to work with. Spending must be controlled. Spending has to be controlled, unlike the previous government. Revenues must be increased, and the economy must grow. Now, Mr. Speaker, the Economic Advisory Panel said that because of the size of this challenge, and that's what Nova Scotians understand, that we cannot focus just on one element, but rather we must work with all three. We agree, and today we are taking the necessary and decisive action. In this budget, in our 4-year plan, we have found the right balance in using the strategies we have available to us. Despite steep revenue growth from our offshore industry when the economy was booming, lack of fiscal discipline and poor policy choices over the past decade have driven the debt upwards and upwards. It now stands as the second highest per capita among the provinces. And now, Mr. Speaker, high debt is not an area where we want to be leaders. The interest on that debt will soon return to $1 billion per year. $1 billion. Nova Scotians are paying dearly for that, the mistakes of the past, and Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotians can be sure that this government will not repeat them. As a result of these measures taken in this budget, measures still to be taken, we believe it is reasonable and achievable to forecast a return to balance in budget 2013-14. This responsible, measured approach will ensure that we respect the wishes of Nova Scotians and the needs of the economy, while continuing to deliver the programs and services that Nova Scotians need and deserve. Of the $1.4 billion fiscal gap identified by the expert panel, we will eliminate $1.1 billion through expenditure management and restraint. The rest will come from spending restraint, better using the dollars that we already have. This ambitious plan will take hard work, discipline, and determination. We will move forward, and that's what Nova Scotians want. We will move forward carefully, looking at how we can improve or transform service delivery, rather than how we can cut and suspend it. Mr. Speaker, as the Economic Advisory Panel pointed out, the size of the financial challenge means that new revenue options have to be considered. As mentioned previously, of the $1.4 billion gap identified by the expert panel, $1.1 billion will be found through expenditure restraint. Again, Mr. Speaker, and about $300 million will be gained through increased revenue. Again, for every dollar of revenue, our commitment is to find over $3 through fiscal discipline. During the back to balance process, a majority of participants said that they could accept an HST increase only if those with low and modest incomes were protected. To fulfill our commitment to make life more affordable, our government, this government, will introduce a new affordable living tax credit. The credit that we are implementing is valued at $70 million and will put the money back into the hands of Nova Scotians living on low or modest incomes. This important message, Mr. Speaker, means that households earning less than $30,000 will receive quarterly payments similar to the existing GST credit. It will return about $240 per household and $47 per dependent child every year. Those earning $34,800 will also receive a portion of the credit. Mr. Speaker, this is the right decision for Nova Scotia families. We will also make a number of vital household items more affordable. Mr. Speaker, we listen to Nova Scotians. Our government will remove the provincial portion of the HST on children's clothing and footwear. We will also remove the provincial portion of the HST on feminine hygiene products and on diapers. This government is also making life affordable for seniors citizens in every part of this province. We will ensure that any senior who receives the GIS, the Guaranteed Income Supplement, will no longer have to pay any of the provincial income tax. This means, Mr. Speaker, this means that $12.5 million will return to about 18,000 senior citizens right across this province. And of course, seniors with low and modest incomes will also be eligible for the affordable living tax credit. Now, Mr. Speaker, getting back to balance is going to take some time and a lot of hard work, and it's something that this government is committed to do and has already begun. In the decisions we have made and those still to come, we will be responsible and we will be tough when we have to be, and we'll be compassionate, and we will always be fair. And Mr. Speaker, we will not force Nova Scotians to pay for our mistakes. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. The honourable member from Halifax, Clayton Park.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and it's my pleasure to rise this evening to say a few words in the late debate that we're having about taxes in this province. And today is, as you know, a historic day. We've seen a budget introduced today in the province. The motion from the Conservative caucus is that there should be no new taxes. It says that, to read it, therefore be it resolved that the taxes of Nova Scotia or Nova Scotians should not be raised to pay for the deficit the NDP have created in their first year in government. And I think that is an important point, Mr. Speaker, because the finance minister's speech today, when he gave his budget speech, led people to believe that not only is the sky falling and we're on the precipice of you know, something dreadful, but also that this has been going on for some time, that our economic decline has been, you know, really difficult, and he's blaming it on the former government. And I think it is important that our finance critic today said that there were 7 years of balanced budgets. And I was the finance critic for quite a number of those years, sitting here as a Liberal finance critic, and I had to recognize that they had taken measures to balance the budget every year. It was a time of increased spending, however, and I agree that our spending had reached a point where we couldn't keep up when the revenue from our royalties fell. That's the biggest loss that we had last year. Was the economy here has been fairly stable, but the international economy led to a great decline in the royalties we would get and the cost of the gas that we are getting from Sable and our offshore resources. So that does hurt the province, and there had to be some change to adjust to that. But the NDP are being opportunistic in trying to suggest that that was long-standing and that this is something that they're rescuing us from. You know, one hastens to use the word sort of holier than thou, because that came through loud and clear today, that they are going to rescue us in such a way. Yeah, Mr. Speaker, you know, our tax brackets are among the highest in the country, and we've added to that today. We've replaced a surcharge with another high tax bracket for our highest income earners. That's not competitive. We are by far the worst tax jurisdiction in the country, and I actually had a quote here from the CFIB, if I can find it, but I'll just tell you, the CFIB have been visiting us regularly for a number of years. They're great lobbyists, and they have shown us that we have the highest tax brackets and the lowest deductions. Our deduction for your personal deduction, and a lot of us are doing our income taxes now, is one of the lowest in the country. And today there's a baby step to increase it by $250. It's about $8,400, maybe something like that. And if you lived in Alberta, it's over $14,000 that you get tax-free right off the top. You know, we are so far behind other provinces, and not only out west, we're behind our neighbours right here in this part of the country. We're behind New Brunswick. We de-indexed our rates. That was something that we can thank the former Ham government for. De-indexing meant that we don't keep pace with the federal government when they increase brackets and give people a little more room. So we've actually squeezed our middle class already to a tremendous degree. But Mr. Speaker, there's a couple of things in this budget that are not good, and I want to say them before I turn my time over. The members of the House know that I could easily spend 10 minutes on this, so I want to hurry up so that our finance critic can also speak. Mr. Speaker, the graduate tax credit, it will amount to about $2,500 actually in the pocket of our young graduates over a 6-year period if they choose to stay here in Nova Scotia. We actually campaigned on that several years ago, Mr. Speaker. You might remember that. It was an idea that we thought had merit. But do you know what? It's been tried in other jurisdictions in the meantime, and it has not worked. It's not helping to retain young people in those jurisdictions. You know, it's not enough money to keep people in a province where they don't have a job that they think is their best opportunity. Young people will go where the opportunity is greatest, and this is not going to keep them here in jobs that, you know, less than they're trained for. So it's you know, we have to look at the evidence. I've heard ministers on that side of the House saying we're going to do evidence-based policy. This is not evidence-based, and it's not even welcomed by the students. Students want upfront help while they're paying the highest tuitions in the country. They want help so that they can study here in Nova Scotia. And I know over 1,000 of them have left our province to study in Newfoundland, where they have lowest tuition. So what we need to do is help our students through tuition and upfront costs. So that's just a misguided policy with no evidence whatsoever, but, you know, they're kind of wedded to it. It sounds good. It's getting votes, so let's do it. But you've got to put your thinking caps on. That's just not going to work. And I can't sit down without mentioning taking the HST, the provincial portion of the HST, off of home heating, off of electricity. That, again, is a very misguided policy. If you want to help the people who need it the most, then you keep the heat program, you up that amount, you help people who can't keep oil in their homes, can't keep the heat on. Those are the people who need it. In the meantime, you've given all the people everywhere, whether they're high income or not, the same benefit, and any number of your members in the NDP side of the government will tell you it's bad policy for the environment. And if indeed you're serious about using a green lens when you introduce policy, which we heard an awful lot about when the NDP were in opposition, and which I myself think is the way government policy should be developed, if you're going to look at it in terms of its impact on the environment, it's encouraging people to keep the heat on and heat their entire homes with electricity far beyond what they need, because now they're getting a break. So I would point out, Mr. Speaker, that our biggest use of greenhouse or cause of greenhouse gases is heating our homes, and especially here in Nova Scotia, where we have old homes that aren't properly insulated, not built to the highest codes. So we should have put the help and taken that money and put it where it was needed most to help people insulate their homes, upgrade their homes, and for the people who really need the help to keep warm to actually get a subsidy or an assistance. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to give the floor over to the member for Kings West.
Thank you. The chair will recognize the honourable member for Kings West. You have approximately 3.5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Tough to get wound up in 3.5 minutes, but I know over the next number of days we'll have lots of time to debate and to analyze and to take a look at this year's budget. And of course, today's motion for late debate put forth, does tell us about the reality that has been foisted upon the province. Just almost 12 months ago now, Nova Scotians were told that there would be no tax increase, that we could balance the budget without a tax increase. Now, just in my 7 years in office, and hitting about 6,000 doors in the last campaign, guess what? The average Nova Scotian will remember that loud and clear. That will ring really, really big. The member for Kings North is nodding his head. Well, in about a year's time, the member from Cape Breton South will do his midterm report. And when he did it the last time, he picked off 10 members that would not be returning to the chamber, and 10 of those members are no longer with us. This will ring very, very huge, because it comes as a result of the excessive spending in just 10, 11 short months. You know, when Deloitte were here with their auditors, they made it very clear to public accounts that when they passed over their first draft in August, they said at the very outside high end, there would be $100 million attributed to the previous government. $100 million deficit. So now we're over $700 million in just 11 months of an NDP government. They have added huge to the deficit. And as I said today, that will be the legacy. Will be a tax increase that a minimum of 75% of Nova Scotians do not want to see, and it's going to have huge business implications. We'll hear from Valerie Payne in the chamber. We'll hear from CFIB. We'll hear from small business. In Nova Scotia, 95% of people are employed in businesses 50 and under. Now, these are the kinds of taxes that impact them immensely. It prevents them from buying that new piece of equipment, from hiring a summer student, from hiring another part-time employee. They reinvest in their businesses. And as of today, you know, every meal in a restaurant, many of the consumables outside of food all increase. The cost of living goes up in Nova Scotia. We are in a tax zone all alone, 15% HST. And that's going to ring big. And remember, with a tax on tax, we just will have about an 8-cent difference in the border towns on gas alone. And it's not just gas. The trickle that is now moving into a torrent. They're going for TVs. They're going for many other appliances across the border because they're much more competitive in New Brunswick. And that's what we're going to see happen on a big scale. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The time allocated for a late debate tonight has expired. I would like to thank all the honourable members for having taken part in tonight's late debate. Did a very good job. And the motion for adjournment was made earlier, so the House stands adjourned until 2 p.m. tomorrow afternoon.